Well, hey guys, Aaron Dorr with the Missouri Firearms Coalition. We are in the Attorney General's office right now. Minutes ago, we finished oral arguments on Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act, the DOJ's #1 mission in life right now. It seems to challenge Missouri's right to protect our gun rights. How did it go?
I think it went really well. Impressed with the job our team did. Certainly appreciative of the amicus brief that was filed by the Missouri Firearms Coalition. I think it was persuasive. And the fact that our Solicitor General was able to cite from that brief, I think, speaks to the quality of legal work on both sides, the right side of this issue, I should say. But, you know, I think the question before the court, and this really was drawn out through the questions that the court was asking, is do states matter?
Right.
Are we going to have states? Our Constitution demands it. Our Constitution gives states certain authority. But if Sapa is overturned, federal officials could order the state of Missouri to commit unconstitutional acts.
Right.
We are all slaves to the federal government if we're not allowed as a state to assert our authority provided in the Constitution under the 10th Amendment.
I mean, one of the questions they kept raising was when the statute says these laws shall not be enforced in this state, shall be invalid to this state. We were very careful with Sapa drafting to not get into that nullification space or supremacy space. They're trying to read into that a supremacy clause violation. The law does not state that. We simply said here in Missouri, Missouri law enforcement will not enforce these federal laws. Is that correct?
Yeah, and look, I mean, the supremacy clause doesn't give the Department of Justice the right to sue the state of Missouri and to nullify Missouri statute. I mean, that is not what the supremacy clause says. The supremacy clause says when you've got a federal statute that's enacted under legitimate constitutional authority of the federal government, and a contradictory state statute, the federal statute prevails. But there is no conflict here, to your point, because Missouri is merely codifying the anti-commandeering doctrine that's been interpreted as part of the 10th Amendment. And so there is no conflict. And the supremacy clause is not an independent cause of action for the Department of Justice to sue the state of Missouri.
I mean, your team made a great job, I think, telling the court that at the end of the day, Sapa law doesn't restrict the federal government. It restricts us. That Sapa law was designed to tell Missouri law enforcement, we want you to enforce Missouri law. We don't actually tell the feds anything about what they can or cannot do here in Missouri. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. And I think that was telling when we argued that the Department of Justice is clearly more upset about what the law says than what it does. They can't show a concrete legal injury. Because no one has been harmed, and certainly no one that they represent has been harmed.
I think it's obvious to the court, to everyone watching now, this is not a Second Amendment issue really at all, to be very honest. You know, we use it, of course, to defend our gun rights here in Missouri, but Sapa ultimately is about state sovereignty and the states telling the feds that we're not going to just let you rule over us by fiat. This has become a much larger issue in the nation now than simply about gun rights.
That's absolutely true. Programs that come from an alphabet soup of federal agencies used to be about a hand up for people at state level, and they were typically administered by state agencies. But now, under the Biden administration, it's become a method to push woke left-wing ideology. Let me give you an example. The free and reduced school lunch program. Well, the Biden administration says schools have to adopt a radical transgender policy in order to get that money. So the Biden administration is going to hold free and reduced school lunch money hostage to achieve a radical woke agenda. They will absolutely do that with our Second Amendment rights. That is coming. And so that's why this piece of legislation is so important. And I'll tell you, Aaron, I'm so proud to live in the state of Missouri where we are setting the benchmark for the rest of the nation. Again, the state of Missouri is leading on issues of state sovereignty and making groundbreaking precedent for the rest of the nation to follow.
Well, no doubt, whatever happens with this case, there are legions of red states right now all across the country where lawmakers want to move forward on Sapa. They should move forward on Sapa, but they want to get that permission slip, unfortunately, from the federal court. So when this gets moved forward, there could be, back in the day, there was 2 states that had constitutional carry back in 2009. Today, 26 red states have adopted this approach. I believe Sapa could be that next iteration of that fight. A lot of it comes down to what happens in these courts. So that being said, best guess on outcomes and turnaround time? I know it's a question and no lawyer likes to answer, but what do you think is likely here right now?
Look, the law is clearly on our side. So ultimately, the state of Missouri will win, and Sapa will take effect. That's going to happen. I think that the timeline is a little bit more of an open question.
Sure.
And there are other procedural hurdles to get through before we get to the final result. But I'll tell you, I anticipate a ruling from the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals probably by August. And then when the Department of Justice loses, they're going to have to decide, like, can we live with the loss?
Right.
Do we want the whole 8th Circuit to look at this?
Right.
Or do they want to try to take it to the United States Supreme Court and end up in a worse position than they are with the loss we're about to hand them?
Because now is the right time for our entire lifetime. This is the Supreme Court we'd like to get in front of with this issue. Again, it's more than just about guns. So, I mean, the way this works procedurally, if we were to lose in the 8th Circuit, then you have the choice to file for an en banc, which is the entire panel, am I correct, and or the Supreme Court. You will take this case to the Supreme Court if necessary. Is that correct?
This case, we're not going to let it go.
Yep.
So if we have to go to the United States Supreme Court and get the right answer from the highest court in the land, we will do that. There may be an intermediate step.
Sure.
And again, so much of that is determined by what do we get from the 3-judge panel that we were in front of today. I like the questions the judges were asking. I like the fact that they focused on the jurisdictional question, and part of that is the standing issue. You know, hey, Department of Justice, the Supremacy Clause doesn't give you the right to invalidate state law.
Right.
How are you harmed?
Right.
How does this limit the federal government at all? And again, I think that speaks to the fact that the Department of Justice is concerned more about what the statute says than how it's being enforced. And if that's where the court lands, the case is over. And, and the statute exists in totality because the Department of Justice didn't bring the right lawsuit at the right time against the right people.
Well, you're right. Missouri is always leading the fight right now on gun rights. One of the leading states in the fight for constitutional carry. One of the leading states in the fight for stand your ground law after a multi-year delay. And now, of course, the lead on the fight for Sapa law. It's a great time for Missouri. Thank you a lot for your time in this whole process and for fighting to defend Missouri's Sapa law. It's a lot at stake in this, and your team has been very, very diligent on this. We appreciate it very much.
Well, I appreciate your attention to this matter and for being here today to listen to the arguments were made. Let me point out too, Article 1, Section 23 of the Missouri Constitution says that the state is obligated to defend our right to keep and bear arms, and it shall under no circumstances avoid that obligation. It is my sacred duty and my honor to defend the constitutional freedoms of the people of the state of Missouri.
And let's be honest, it's a lot of fun right now, given this president. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate it.